Hi everybody, welcome to the webinar, Competence by Design and CanMEDS 2015. My name is Jason Frank. I'm the Director of Specialty Education at the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada. Thank you so much for joining this webinar today. We have a very high turnout. We have 143 people from across Canada and around the world signed up for this webinar, and that reflects the interest in this project, and we're very grateful you've set aside the time for that. We hope you'll find this webinar really useful. So, this is the Royal College webinar about an emerging new educational design for Canadian medical education with important implications for all of the countries around the world that use CanMEDS, and that's 26 jurisdictions that we're aware of. We're just going to advance the slides momentarily, and we'll get started. All right, so let's dive in. As you all know, Canadian training is considered world leading, but there's something we can always do better. And in fact, we want to make sure that our medical education system here in Canada provides not only high quality training programs, but enhances the competence of the next generation. In other words, we want to always be getting better. On your screen, you should see two black and white photos, two famous medical education foundational figures, Abraham Flexner and Sir William Osler. And really, the system that we have now in terms of residency education is about 100 years old, and it was heavily influenced by these two individuals. And in fact, it looks very similar to what Osler designed for Johns Hopkins in around 1910. The features are very familiar in terms of having a master clinician who oversees a small number of trainees on a ward, and the teachings focused around the encounters with patients. If you think back to that era, the nature of medicine was bloodletting was still an important therapeutic response, and streptomycin was just being an emerging therapy. We've come a long way in 100 years, but the question is, has our training system really evolved with medicine? Fundamentally, our challenge for all of us who are educational leaders is to ensure that graduates are competent in all needed domains. I'm going to pause here for a second. A number of you have joined us just now with this webinar, and I want to remind you that there's 143 people on this webinar today, so we've muted all the lines. There won't be an opportunity to call in, but you will have an opportunity to ask questions, and we have a number of people standing by. If you just go to the right-hand side of your page and type in a text message, you'll be able to send us a question that you want answered, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can for the time we have allotted, which is about an hour today. And any questions we don't tackle, we'll try our best to follow up with you. If you have technical difficulties, you can email the CanMEDS inbox, which is canmeds@royalcollege.ca, and we'll do our best to help you if we can. So once again, I want to encourage you to ask questions. It won't be over the phone. It'll be by typing in text. So let's continue. Remember, our goal is how can we ensure our graduates are competent in all the needed domains to serve patients well. Let me tell you a little bit about drivers for change. You heard me say right off the top of this webinar that Canadian medical education is considered world leading. It's admired by a number of countries around the world. There are a lot of things we're doing right. So why change? Here's an example of one of the criticisms that is often leveled at medical education systems worldwide right now. Not Canada in particular, but something that you'd hear around the world. Looking at these three professions, we have medical training, we have astronaut training, we have martial arts. One of these things is not like the other, and that is health professions education. Much of our training, our credentialing, access to a certification exam, your ability to complete a program and move on in your career is about time. It's about how many hours, how many days, how many weeks you spent on a ward, and really it's about completion of that ward duty, meaning that the trainee was present with a pulse and nobody got harmed, and not so much about ensuring that that trainee achieved all the competencies that were laid out to be learned. If you're an astronaut, you have to demonstrate you have all the competencies for the mission, or you're not going on that mission. And in fact, if none of the astronauts in the training program were able to complete all of the training, that mission would be delayed or scrubbed. Medicine's not like that. Similarly, if you think about martial arts training as people progress through their belts, you can't get your belt for how many days you spent in the dojang. You get your belt when you can demonstrate to the master that you have all of the abilities relevant to the next belt. So this is one of the criticisms of health professions training, that maybe we should rethink what we're doing. We certainly live in an age of accountability. The end of the 20th and the early 21st century has seen the rise of greater demands by society with respect to their professionals. Not only do they want us all to be competent, they want us all to be safe. They want us to be great stewards of resources, and they want us to justify, in fact, all the resources given to us by society. So in a number of jurisdictions around the world, in fact, medical education is being criticized, and the profession has lost some autonomy because of a perceived lack of responsiveness to the criticisms. This is similar to the slide I showed you about the astronaut training and black belts. One of the current criticisms is that we have the so-called teabag model, that we take trainees and we steep them in a program for an X number of years, and we give them a piece of paper to move on after that. We need to ensure that our graduates have all of the abilities laid out in the curriculum, the espoused curriculum. Another criticism is that we have these phases of medical education that are actually very siloed. And research tells us that it's very difficult for a trainee as they progress through each of these stages: undergraduate medical education, residency education, sometimes post-residency education, and then lifelong learning. In each of those stages, there's data that says that there are a number of challenges with the transition. It's very hard, that the trainee may not be oriented well to the tasks and responsibilities of the next stage. Those of you on this webinar who are physicians, you might want to think back to your first day of residency training, and how, if you were the unlucky one who was put on call, how terrifying that was, that maybe you weren't prepared for that level of responsibility. Similarly, if you think back to your first day of being an attending physician with an independent license, suddenly all the supervision had disappeared, and how well prepared for that role did you feel? We can do better. So to summarize, there's about 5 arguments that calling for change in medical education, and they're summarized here. We need a model for the 21st century. So much has changed since we designed residency education at the very least, and continuing professional development is even younger than that. We need to respond to calls for change for graduate competency. So there are a number of things where various stakeholders have said that the content of our training program is not well aligned. We need to ensure graduates have all the essential competencies. If a discipline has defined that the following are the essential procedures and knowledge necessary, do our programs really ensure that every graduate has all of the essentials? We need to move towards a true continuum and progression of competence. So that's jargon for, we want to make the medical education system, undergrad, residency to continuing professional development, we want to make it work. We want to make it plug into the next phase, prepare our trainees for each phase of their career, right on into retirement. Progression of competence means there should be a logical sequencing of abilities as somebody differentiates into various disciplines and then focuses their practices as they go on. That should be very transparent to all of us as we progress through our career. What is expected of me? What should I be able to do at this stage of my career? And part of all of this is we need to move away from time-based credentialing. Currently here at the Royal College and at every college around the world that I'm aware of, we make decisions about who has access to certification exams, who progresses, who is given a piece of paper saying that they are certified, and a designation like Fellow of the Royal College, based on how many ward rotations they've completed and some supervisor signing off that that was good enough. We can do better. Fundamentally, it's about this. A move to competency-based medical education, CBME is the acronym, is a better way to train health professionals. And we'd like to move a little bit further down the road in Canada along that way. So let me introduce you to the project we call Competence by Design. All of that was a prelude to why we're making a change, why we've chosen competency-based medical education as the direction to go. And now let me introduce to you 2 things. Competence by Design as a large innovation in medical education, the direction the college is moving. And within that, one of the major work projects within Competence by Design is an update to the CanMEDS framework we're calling CanMEDS 2015. So first, a little bit of an overview of Competence by Design. I want to remind you all that we're standing by to take your questions. Just type it into the text box. I do have about 6 questions that have been submitted so far, and I look forward to answering those at the end of this. Competence by Design, also known as CBD around here, is a move to enhance our medical education system in a number of ways. The first is to actually try and create a real continuum of medical education, meaning a system whereby the competencies of undergraduate medical education enable someone to smoothly transition to residency education, which enables someone to smoothly transition to either further training or on into practice. And I'll show you how this design is trying to facilitate that. We're using a competency-based model that I mentioned before, and ultimately this model is meant to address societal needs and prepare people for the best quality of patient care. Couple of other features about competence by design. This is supposed to be learner-focused, and like I said before, we're using a competency-based model that is the organizing framework for all of these activities you're about to hear about. This reflects a worldwide trend towards competency-based medical education. You'll certainly see it in the US, in the Netherlands, in the UK, in the Australian Royal Colleges. This is a worldwide phenomenon. And everything we're about to present to you aligns with a major project in Canada called the Future of Medical Education in Canada, Postgraduate, FMEC-PG. Those recommendations you'll find resonance in what we're about to show you. Okay. Our goal with this change is to try and address some of those criticisms of contemporary medical education around the world. We want to ensure every graduate meets minimum competence while still teaching for excellence. We still want people to aspire to be the best physician or surgeon they can be. We want to support physicians' skill development across the continuum, across their whole career. We want to respond to changing needs, and we're going to show you a little bit more about that in terms of CanMEDS 2015. We want to address some definite gaps in our current system. An example is that we have a failure to fail phenomenon across the continuum of medical education. And it's been best documented in residency education, where we have some examples in the literature where sometimes a supervisor will just not have the data they need to hold somebody back who they have a sense may require remedial. Or perhaps even worse, that perhaps a supervisor just finds it too hard to hold somebody back. The system doesn't support helping a trainee who is in difficulty. The flip side of that coin is probably also true. We don't have a system that's flexible enough that can be tailored to an individual who is a superstar, who has acquired all the competencies expected in more rapid fashion. We do want to reduce the administrative burden on faculties. We want to promote smoother credentialing and accreditation, and we're going to use technology and the new educational design to do that. And finally, we think this new system increases our ability to demonstrate accountability and transparency. That when a learner logs into this new system, they will see a pathway of all the things they need to learn. So it's aspirational. This slide is one of the most critical things I'm going to show you today. This is called the new proposed competence by design stages. It's a working draft. It's been nicknamed the clamshell, the Wi-Fi symbol, and the flashlight. Perhaps the flashlight's the best one. And the idea is, on the left-hand side of this diagram, you can see sort of the traditional stages of medical education. You know, you go from a junior med student, senior med student, junior resident, senior resident, and so on. And what we want to do is move to a more deliberate series of stages that correspond with competencies to be acquired as someone progresses. And this is a way of articulating that true continuum that plugs into each stage. The educators who have contributed to this design, this is about version 17, have come up with these stages that they think have resonated so far, and we look forward to your feedback on them. We thought that medical school can often be divided into medical school fundamentals and early clinical activity, keeping in mind that it's not really as black and white as that in all schools nowadays. Residency education has been split not into postgraduate years, but into 4 phases of residency education. So remember that this system, while using time as a resource, is not based on time. So the 4 phases are transition to the discipline, foundations of a discipline, core training, and then transition to practice. Core training and foundations you'll recognize. They already exist. They're already fundamental ingredients. We just put different labels on them. For example, foundations of a discipline is usually what most people would recognize as a basic clinical training year. Years spent getting some fundamental competencies that prepare a trainee for further higher, more focused training. Core of a discipline is the core rotations and activities that already exist now. What's new are the two new stages that we put as bookends on either side of those. The first we call transition to discipline, and that's a transition from medical school into greater responsibility as a resident, somebody who has an educational license to practice. And in our minds, this stage may be as short as a half day. It may be as long as a month. Each discipline will be asked to allocate a certain amount of time to this. Each trainee will be oriented to the discipline and then also undergo an initial assessment that sees what competencies that trainee is arriving with. This is akin to a movement in the U.S. towards so-called surgical boot camps, where trainees who have matched to a surgical program will arrive first to do a series of workshops that prepare them to be a really good surgery resident. How to learn as a surgeon, how to scrub in effectively, how to be a great assistant, how to prepare to be an operator, all of those kinds of things. So if you apply that principle to a number of disciplines, you could see how in some disciplines this first stage may be very short, and in other disciplines it may be very long, or at least longer. Since trainees come from a variety of backgrounds, some train overseas, some train in a variety of schools in Canada, this first stage also allows a program director to get data on where each trainee is starting from. Some of them may already have achieved some initial milestones. The other side of the bookend is something we call transition to practice. And while this may be happening on an ad hoc basis already, the Royal College is moving to make a mandatory stage of training in which a senior trainee will be given a different level of supervision prior to exit to the program. And that level of supervision is a so-called a junior attending, or a almost independent practitioner. And the idea is they would still be supervised, but supervised behaving the way an attending physician would, with similar level of responsibilities. In my own emergency medicine program, that means that at some point in the senior year, my R5s, my senior residents, the fifth-year residents, would be put on the attending staff schedule. They will be given attending duties, like other emergency physicians like myself. They will be asked to see as many people on shift as an attending physician would. They'll be asked to supervise and teach and have some of similar academic duties. And it's on that they will be evaluated in terms of their appropriate care and behaviors. So transition to practice made mandatory. The final phase is the longest phase of a physician's career, and we call that enhanced expertise / continuing professional development. And the intent of this is, of course, we expect all physicians to continue to not only maintain their competence, but enhance their competence within their scope of practice. And that's called continuing professional development. In addition, we know that some physicians at different points in their career will change their scope of practice by acquiring new abilities. And again, in my own discipline, an example of that might be that we've recently adopted point-of-care ultrasound. That's something that happened since I graduated from residency, and so that would be enhanced expertise for me. So across this continuum, this project proposes to have available a series of milestones that are that will guide curriculum. Each of the horizontal bands are meant to be a bit of a gate, meaning that the trainee arrives and has a discussion with those overseeing their training as to whether or not they've achieved all of the competencies in that stage before they're allowed to proceed on to the next stage. That means learning plans can be a bit more individualized, and some individuals will achieve these competencies faster, and then their next year's rotations can be organized so that they move on to the next stage. This diagram reflects all of the competence by design initiatives that are underway. And this may impress you that there are a lot of changes underfoot. There's a lot of activity at the Royal College that we are investing in. Competency-based medical education, it's at its core. It's a philosophy and an approach to medical education. CanMEDS 2015 is a fundamental first work package of this initiative, and I'm going to tell you about that next. This slide, though, also illustrates some other features of competence by design that will be rolled out. There'll be a new accreditation system that is more focused on the outcomes of that program, meaning the evidence of the quality of graduates, and less focused on some process measures. Credentialing will change from its current time-based system to one that's more based on achievement of educational milestones. That's a different conversation. Assessment will change. We will change the nature of our exams in some way so that there's greater emphasis on core knowledge and ability. And the timing of the exams will be moved earlier into training, and more about that in a minute. Much greater emphasis on in-training assessment, and we'll build a system for you that will support that. One of the key ingredients in that system is a new e-portfolio, which we intend will follow a physician from the beginning of their residency education until the last day of their career. There's even a possibility in discussion with some of the undergraduate deans that this e-portfolio could be used from the first day of medical school till their last day of retirement, and we'd love to create that opportunity. A little bit about the e-portfolio before I move off the slide. So what we envision is that on the first day of residency, an individual would log in, and the software would recognize them as, welcome, John Smith. We see you're an obstetrics resident. Here's your dashboard showing all of the educational milestones you need to achieve and all the activities we're expecting of you. That person will interact with that e-portfolio both to type in some aspects of their reflections on their progress, but use it both formatively and summatively for their assessment. That e-portfolio will be their evidence of achievement, and it will give data to their program director about how each of the trainees are progressing. That means there'll be new kinds of data available to programs. You'll be able to see milestones curves, meaning the sequence that your trainees are achieving set milestones, and you'll be able to compare that not only to peers, but also to other programs, so you can see how your program is doing. So the e-portfolio will be very powerful for residency. In practice, there'll be some advanced milestones for individuals to use. If I log into this new e-portfolio as an emergency physician, it'll say, welcome, Dr. Frank. We see you're a certified emergency physician. Use the following wizard to organize your continuing professional development. Here's one that is specific to emergency medicine. So we're very excited about that development. We want you to know that this is a hybrid model of competency-based education. The way this is designed is intentionally so that on average across the entire country, we expect the same amount of money and the same amount of time will be required as it is today. A small number of individuals will be able to progress faster. They would have to achieve all of their milestones in a quicker way, in a way that allows them to access the exam faster and allows them, in conjunction with their program director's approval, to reorganize their next year's rotations and perhaps graduate sooner. The system will also allow those who need remediation, just as there's a small number that do right now in our current system, to have a bit more time to achieve the milestones laid out. Overall, we think the system will be similar to the exact amount of time and resources allocated today. So it's a hybrid model. Just to reinforce a couple of things I said about this new system, here's our snapshot of our current system, starting from the top to bottom. Basic clinical training year, junior and senior residency, some in-training assessment, either as IDERs, the occasional OSCE, depending on the program, in-training written exams, maybe an oral exam or two. And then there's this mad dash at the end of training where there's exam preparation. Trainees are pretty much lost to clinical activity during that time, and then the trainee gets certified if they pass. This new system will look something like this for residency education. Starting from top to bottom, you get the orientation and assessment, introduction to an e-portfolio that will follow the individual all the way through and will be the major framework for their evidence of achievement and ability to move on to the next stage. Foundational training, core and electives, preparation for practice, and then certification. You see the exam moves back to the end of core training. The final transition to practice is the final phase. And the final competency assessment is actually the sign-off by the program director and their committee that this person is behaving and displays all of the competencies expected of a colleague who's ready for independent practice. The pictures on the side are not tombstones, they're supposed to be milestones. Okay, so that was a bit about competence by design. Thank you for all the questions that are coming in. I just want to remind you, you can type in questions in the text box on the right-hand side of your screen. I'm going relatively quickly, so if there's anything I can do to clarify, there'll be quite a bit of time on this webinar to discuss your questions and the implications for you. So let me just connect that to CanMEDS 2015. Everybody on this webinar is probably aware that CanMEDS is the official framework of the Royal College. It's been around for about 20 years. It's used in about 26 jurisdictions that we're aware of. That means thousands of trainees worldwide have their training based on CanMEDS. And furthermore, there are another tens of thousands of physicians around the world whose maintenance of competence is based on this framework. The last time we updated this framework was 2005, and we promised that we would very carefully update CanMEDS so that it wouldn't become anachronistic and out of date. We know that medicine changes daily. It's hard for any physician to keep up with all of the science in their discipline, and CanMEDS needs to reflect that evolving profession and practice. And B, we want to ensure that we don't change the framework too often so that it becomes a real burden for program directors, program administrators, all of those who have to implement CanMEDS. So we think right now that sweet spot is around 10 years. So we're coming up on another 10-year anniversary of CanMEDS, and we've been hard at work for over a year now, almost 2 years, trying to create the next version of CanMEDS. Let me tell you about what we've been doing. So CanMEDS 2015 is intended to look similar to what you're all familiar with, the 7 educational domains or competencies of a physician. But we're going to introduce into CanMEDS this new element of milestones, and I'll define that for you in a second. The milestones are what allow us to map out progression of competence across the entire continuum of MedEd. CanMEDS 2015 is explicitly designed for that continuum. There's also going to be some new content. An example is we have promised as an organization to integrate what we know about patient safety and the science of quality delivery of care. There are some evolutionary aspects in every domain of CanMEDS, so there's latest literature that needs to be incorporated. So we promise to have a look at all of that new content. There's also been a couple of areas of medicine that have emerged since the last time CanMEDS was looked at, and I'll tell you about those in a moment. When CanMEDS 2015 rolls out, the college is also committed to rolling out new faculty development tools and programs and products. So you'll see workshops come your way. We'll help prepare your faculty to teach any of the new content. So what's a milestone? Let me introduce to you actually 2 terms, a milestone and an EPA, also called an entrustable professional activity. This new version of CanMEDS 2015 that will be plugged into as a fundamental ingredient in the Competence by Design project is based on these 2 educational concepts. A milestone is very simple. It's the ability expected of a health professional at a stage of development. It's not a new concept. It's been an ingredient in competency-based education for decades, but it's new to medicine. So another way of thinking about it is, what are the competencies I would expect at each stage of that flashlight diagram that I gave you? An example of a concrete milestone, intubate an airway under supervision. Entrustable professional activities were developed by one of my colleagues, Ole ten Kat from the Netherlands. And what he did is he followed an obstetrician around in his clinic for a week, or in his activities for a week, and said that there are recurring issues that are really prototypical of obstetrics and gynecology. So an entrustable professional activity is the key tasks of a discipline that a practitioner needs to be able to perform. And an example from the American Board of Pediatrics is to be able to run an ambulatory pediatric clinic. There's a lot of competencies, in fact, a lot of milestones within that example of an EPA. The reason why I'm introducing this to you is these are the key ingredients that will map the expectation of each trainee as they progress through each stage. Milestones are attractive for an educational design for a number of reasons that are listed here. They make progression of competence very transparent. It's an easy way to design how one competency achievement fits into the next. It allows for a completely different dialogue about assessment. Often what is witnessed in the literature in terms of how we perform assessment right now is some faculty signs an in-training assessment form, they put a pen down a page, they make some comments which often are not very elaborate. They usually are something like, read more, doing well, keep it up. This changes the dialogue about assessment. It deals with this failure to fail phenomenon because instead we're going to ask faculty to say, I was in charge of observing 3 milestones on this rotation. Let's have a dialogue today about what we just observed. It looks like you're performing at level 2 of this milestone, not quite at the level we want you to be at. That changes assessment. This allows for a comprehensive curriculum blueprint. You can see how each milestone is laid out along the way to independent practice. It allows us to give guidance to faculty that there are some things they can stop doing. They can stop, perhaps, performing an assessment on every CanMEDS domain, on every rotation, or in every clinic. Instead, the new guidance will be, Dr. Smith, on this rotation, I really need you to be in charge of observing and teaching these 3 milestones. Your learners need to achieve those milestones while they're with you. And finally, this is a very transparent system for learners. When they log into their new ePortfolio, they'll see a dashboard that shows them the milestones they need to achieve at each stage, how they're doing versus their peers, how they've progressed lately, what assessments are still pending. Milestones lay that out for everybody. Okay, so CanMEDS 2015 promises to allow a new framework of competencies that progress across the continuum, follow someone across their career. And when we roll this out, the college is committed to providing additional support so that the transition to the new framework is easier. The promise of plugging in CanMEDS 2015 into that competence by design system is that as educators, we'll be able to have real data and evidence of how each of our trainees is progressing through the system. At any time, a program director or a program administrator will be able to log into the dashboard of their program on the new ePortfolio and see how each of their trainees is progressing in milestones and how that compares to their peers and other programs and what's expected of them. That allows you to intervene sooner for both your superstars and for those who need remedial. Learners will have this clear, transparent roadmap that they can use. Here's all of the activities that are underway for CanMEDS 2015 alone. There's an integration committee that really does the editing to knit things together. There's a national advisory committee with representatives of all of the leading medical organizations in Canada, so the CMA, the Medical Council of Canada, the College of Family Physicians of Canada. In fact, Ivio Anderson, my colleague from the CFPC, and I co-chair this committee. The medical regulatory authorities, the deans, and so on. We've commissioned a number of expert working groups for CanMEDS 2015. And basically, we started by dividing up the CanMEDS framework into a number of pieces. So you'll see all the roles plus some subgroups. So within Scholar, we've divided up into 4 domains: teaching, lifelong learning, research, critical appraisal. Within the professional, we've divided into physician health and professionalism. But there's a couple of new groups that have emerged in the process of this project. One is the Patient Safety Expert Working Group. And their job has been to advise the college about the science of patient safety and quality care that cuts across the other roles. So we're not creating a new petal of the flower. And similarly, the eHealth Expert Working Group has emerged to advise us on how technology is going to impact or is impacting on healthcare and what the essential competencies of the framework should be with respect to that domain. All of those expert working groups need to report in to both the National Advisory Committee and on into the Editing Committee with their proposals for the new framework. So that's what's underway. The expert working groups are made up of a variety of people. They're not just clinicians, there are also some scientists, some people from other health professions, and trainees, and they're all providing advice and creating those reports. The good news is that those reports are coming into the college as we speak. So we have about half of the draft elements of the new framework. Our job in the college over the Christmas holidays is to do some editing so they all look similar. And there'll be a couple of meetings of the National Advisory Committee and the Editing Committee in January. Somewhere around Valentine's Day, we're going to roll out to the world a prelude, a draft version of the new CanMEDS 2015 framework. We're going to invite your feedback on that. So if you look to the Royal College website and check your inbox, we're going to be emailing all of you that the framework is now available, and we'll be asking you to complete surveys on your reaction. You read this framework, what do you think of the new wording? Is it better? Is it worse? Is something missing based on your expertise or your experience? And we'll hang on your every word. The sequence of events is that over the months of sort of February to May, we'll be collecting input from around the world. Everybody who uses CanMEDS will be looking for a reaction to the new framework. We'll collate that over the summer. There'll be another summit of the National Advisory Committee somewhere around September 2014. And then in the fall of 2014, we'll have a penultimate version of CanMEDS that we'll display on the website and we'll begin to send to organizations for endorsement. Early in 2015, we hope that the Royal College Council will vote on the new version of CanMEDS, and we hope that it'll pass at that point, and we'll get prepared with materials and faculty development for you to help roll out the new framework. The hard launch, so-called, the official launch of CanMEDS 2015 is at the ICRE, International Conference on Residency Education meeting in Vancouver in October 2015. I hope all of you will be there to be a part of it. It'll be a major part of that meeting. There'll be workshops on how to teach it, how to assess it, how to get oriented to the new tools, and that'll be a real boost for your program if you're in attendance at that meeting. Some implications of this new version of CanMEDS. After the new framework is approved, we'll be moving very rapidly to support all of the disciplines recognized by the Royal College in their rollout of CanMEDS. Not all of the 83 currently recognized disciplines will roll out in the same year. We're going to stratify our disciplines into cohorts, and that will allow them to each work on it with support and then deploy the new standards in sort of a year-by-year fashion. So all of you listening on this webinar, not every discipline is going to be in the first cohort. Some disciplines have already come forward. We have about 12 disciplines that are very keen to use Milestones in their training. They see it as a real advantage. Having said that, there's some other disciplines that want to take a bit more time and be a little bit later in the sequence. The college will help every discipline develop new document standards. So the current objectives of training will be a new version that will incorporate milestones and EPAs. There'll be a new discipline-specific e-portfolio, and we hope an e-logbook. There'll be integration of all of this into residency education and learning and practice. And we'll be able to then roll out some faculty development and help faculty stop doing low-impact educational activity and repurpose their time to focus on assessing these milestones. Continued professional development, we hope that all of this will roll out in a similar time period for all of us in practice, that there'll be a new scope of practice tool when you log into Mainport. This e-portfolio will be discipline-specific. It'll recognize you and your discipline. It'll allow you to interact with the e-portfolio and tailor it to your unique configuration of practice. So we're pretty excited that this new version of CanMEDS and this new version of the e-portfolio will help all of us learn and practice better. I've already talked about this timeline. The key elements here are that there'll be a new version of the CanMEDS framework for discussion sometime around Valentine's Day, and that a new hard launch of this framework, the official launch, is in Vancouver, Canada, October 2015 at ICRE. So we know that this will impact all levels of medical education, and so we want you to know that we're committed to being very consultative. We want you to tell us your opinions about the framework along the way. So we have data from the first initial series of surveys we did spring of 2013. We did a national and international online survey. We invited some letters from leading organizations around the world. We did a town hall at this year's ICRE. We had a number of data points. So currently what's underway and what's available to you is we've written letters with feedback from key partners. You'll follow a number of developments on Twitter. You can find the Royal College Twitter there. You can find us on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Dr. J. Frank. You can email the CanMEDS office and get more information. And there'll be this series of webinars. This is webinar number 3, and I would expect we'll be doing at least a dozen of these over the next year. In the coming months, you'll see those expert working group preliminary reports. You'll see the initial online survey results released. You'll see a new survey launched asking for your reaction to those first reports. We'll have input from those various working groups, National Advisory Committee. We have an International Advisory Committee as well. After 2015 is the specially specific rollout. We've talked about that already. So, to summarize everything you've heard, we live in an era where medical education is very good, but there are still some things that need to be addressed. We have knowledge now that tells us that there's a better system that's possible, and the Royal College has made an explicit move to actually create and implement that better system. We want to do it with you, everybody who's on this webinar today. You're our partners and stakeholders. We work for you. This system needs to roll out with your input. Competence by design is a big change. It's going to involve a move towards more competency-based system, new stages of training instead of years of training. It will allow a select number of trainees to have more time and a few to have accelerated early graduation. It will move the timing and nature of exams a little back a little bit. It will change and enhance the in-training assessment we do. It will change accreditation. It will change credentialing, and it'll all be founded on a new e-portfolio and a new CanMEDS 2015 milestone-based framework. we'd love to have your questions. So we have some time left in this webinar. There are dozens of questions coming in, so I really like this. I'm going to do my best to work through them and try and answer them now. While I'm talking, please feel free to type in anything you have on your mind that maybe you didn't understand, I went too quickly, or something that you're thinking about how it would apply to you. I'll do my best to get through as many of these as I can. First question is a great one. How do you foresee milestones being implemented in a one-year program? That's from somebody who's overseeing a palliative medicine program. There are a number of ways that milestones could be used. And the first thing I'm going to tell you is that all of this is adaptable for every discipline. So it's not as though one size fits all, but the principles are going to be deployed across all disciplines. Milestones can be very useful for those arriving in a one-year program. The program director can use that initial transition to residency stage to orient their learners to some initial competencies you want your learners to have. It also allows you to assess your learners because they'll come from a variety of backgrounds. So even if you're in a one-year program, you can do that initial orientation to residency phase stage using milestones to assess where people are starting from. Milestones can still be used at strategic points along the way. For each activity, like a rotation that you deploy, you can say to your faculty, please focus on these milestones to be achieved. Milestones will give you information through the ePortfolio dashboard as to how your trainees are progressing, and will allow you to support those who are falling behind. And by the end of your program, your trainee needs to demonstrate that they've achieved all the essential milestones, all the essential ingredients in terms of competencies for your program before they graduate. The next question is about timelines. What should a program be doing so they're ready for July 2015? I want you to know that we're not expecting every program to be ready to deploy the new version of this on July 2015. In fact, the framework's official launch is in October 2015, so you have a bit of breathing space. What will be happening between now and then is that a select number of disciplines have come forward and asked for permission to be early adopters. They want to be the pioneers. They want to be the first to use milestones because they see it as such an advantage. That allows them to reformat their curriculum and to do different things. So for those who are involved in the pilot projects and early implementation, we will be working with those select groups, and yeah, there'll be some activity for those disciplines early on. For the rest of us, there'll be a series of cohorts who will be working through adoption and implementation of this new project. Okay, I'm up to question 3 here. How does this new model take into account the importance of experiential learner and how experiential learning has been shown to be important in the acquisition of excellence? I entirely endorse that. In fact, if you think about expertise theory, time on task is an absolutely essential ingredient. If you want someone to be a master in any domain, they need time, they need deliberate practice, they need opportunity to apply the things they've learned. This new system does not discount that. In fact, you heard me say that this is a hybrid competency-based program. It is not a so-called pure competency-based that is time-free. In fact, this system is intended to provide the same level of patient-level experiences that our trainees achieve now, but what we've layered on is a bit more structure. So now we're looking for faculty to actually observe all of the things that are in the espoused curriculum. In other words, amidst all of that experiential learning, all that role modeling, all that teaching at the bedside, we want learners to know that there are some key things they need to achieve and display. And we want faculty to know that they need to observe the essential parts of that. Next one, are you able to speak about the relationship between CBD and the ministries of each province to provide funding the training program's trainee? Yes, absolutely. So we've given a heads up to all the ministries of health that this is coming. There's a roadshow that will involve senior leadership of the Royal College traveling to meet each of the ministry officials to make sure that they know the details about this. We'll be presenting this project to the Health Human Resources Committee of all the Deputy Ministers of Health from across the country in the new year. And what we've signaled so far is that, yes, this is a different system, but we're not asking for more money. We're not asking for more time. We think that this design will allow the vast majority of trainees, meaning almost the entire population, to progress pretty much through what they do now, but with a different structure. You should know another version of that line of thinking is, do the regulatory authorities who grant educational and independent licenses know this is coming? And they absolutely do. We've done 2 presentations to that group so far, and we'll be doing a series more. And you should know that with respect to the issue of the exam moving earlier, we've signaled to the licensing authority that that does not confer independent practice from our perspective. It does not lead to certification at that point. Only the final completion of the transition to practice phase, when the program director signs off, will the Royal College grant certification. So I'm up to question number 5 here. How and when will existing SDRs be changed to adapt to this model? The answer is it depends on which discipline you're referring to. We plan to roll these out in a series of cohorts over time. And we'll be asking each of the specialty committees the Royal College recognizes to put their hand up and select which cohort they would like to be in. You already heard me say that there are 12 disciplines that have approached us to say we want to be early pioneers. We think we'll probably work with 2 of them, the most advanced group that have worked on this already the most, to actually work with them over the next year, even before CanMEDS is finished. After that, we'll probably be doing about 10 to 15 disciplines a year. Number 6, how will CCFP certification be integrated into this model? I'm not sure what you meant by that question, but there are a couple of ways of interpreting it. You should know that the College of Family Physicians already have a CCC curriculum, which is very much aligned with all the principles you heard today. So in fact, the CFPC is ahead of us in terms of implementing competency-based education, and we have a lot to learn from our sister college. With respect to what does it mean what does certification mean in terms of entering a Royal College discipline, perhaps? We've always granted credit for activity in a family medicine degree. I think this new version of credentialing will be based on what milestones were achieved in family medicine training. Any more than that, you'd have to look at each individual discipline and how they treat the CFPC prior certification. Just a little bit more time left, and lots of questions are coming in. Thank you so much for all your interest. I'll just scroll down a little bit here. If a resident finishes months before the scheduled exam, what will they do during the time before the exam? So that's in theoretically, if you have a superstar who was really accelerated, achieved all the milestones necessary. So there's a couple of scenarios there. So one is, will we keep on having the current exam format once a year? That's to be determined. We might offer it more often. Another answer to that question would be, if someone has achieved all of the milestones that enable them to access the exam, but there's months ahead, then they can go on and start working on their transition to practice activities, give them additional responsibility, or they could go on and start working on some additional advanced training in a certain area that can be negotiated with the program director. The funding base is still there. It's really about what are the milestones that are the priority for the next scheduled rotations. So I'm on up to question 8 here. Written and OSCE exams are now done throughout training to assess competency in internal medicine subspecialties that are not procedurally based. Can you give me some concrete examples of milestones that are not procedural and how you would measure them? The good news is there are lots of examples of this already on the web. So I won't really have time to go through them all today, but I'd encourage you to, if you're in internal medicine, to surf over to the American Board of Internal Medicine website. And there you can look at their latest version of their milestones document, which they've been using for 2 years. It's heavily weighted to cognitive domains. Similarly, you can look at the American Board of Pediatrics. You can look at the Royal Australasian College of Psychiatry's documents. All of those are not weighted on procedural disciplines. They're non-technical skills. They're cognitive and otherwise. There are lots of examples of how milestones can work in non-technical disciplines, and I'm very confident we'll be able to implement this in a meaningful and concrete, accessible way. Question 9, why not put e-health under the communicator role? What I would encourage you to do to answer that question is to actually review the draft e-health expert working group report when it's posted. And in fact, if you wanted to review that before it's posted, you can just email the CanMEDS inbox, canmeds@royalcollege.ca, and we'll send it to you in draft. When you look at that draft, you'll see that actually they're making suggestions across the multiple different roles. I am up to number 10. Can you offer some examples of low-value educational activities? I've given a couple, and I'll just put labels on them. So one example is asking our frontline faculty to assess every CanMEDS role on every rotation. We think that that leads to gaming of assessment tools. It leads to people writing not applicable. It leads to misunderstandings. And it leads to sort of generic statements instead of something that's really concrete, authentic assessment and useful feedback that helps that trainee progress to the next level. So that's an example of an activity where we would advise people to stop designing their system for it and instead train our faculty to assess key select milestones on each rotation to enable someone to achieve a segment of what's expected of them. I'm going to move on. A couple of these are examples of the same. As the plan is to keep undergraduate in mind, is there any perceived impact with students that take a family medicine path? A student that takes a family medicine path. There are electives across the college's evaluations and expectations that could be different and confusing. Again, I'm not entirely sure what you meant by your question, but I think what you're asking is, if someone goes into family medicine training, are there unintended consequences for that resident? And I don't think so. Certainly we need to orient all our involved faculty to the new system, but as you heard me say a moment ago, the family medicine training itself is already a new system that is busy orienting faculty across the system. So even when family medicine trainees are off service, our faculty need to know what's expected in their new CCC curriculum. So this change is happening at the same time. Next one, will the MCC Part 2 be moved back to undergraduate? You know, that's something we got to ask a Medical Council of Canada official. I do not think that's their intent, though they are hard at work trying to harmonize the MCC with various aspects of residency exams. So for example, there's a move to harmonize the MCC Part 2 with the CFPC exam, and there's some talk of harmonizing the MCC Part 2 with surgical foundations. And so those are conversations that are ongoing. We're almost out of time, so I'll just take a select number of other ones. Will implementation timeline be communicated to everyone? Absolutely. You can find information about Competence by Design and CanMEDS on our website. There'll be a series of webinars like this. And in fact, if for your colleagues who weren't able to attend today's webinar, we'll be recording this and posting it. In fact, all of our series of webinars in both languages will be posted, and you can listen to them at your leisure, or you know, play them for your residency training committee meeting. Will the e-portfolio encompass all points of care assessment? All points of care assessment. I'm not sure what's intended by that question. I think what you mean is, will the e-portfolio be comprehensive? And the answer is yes, with one caveat, and that is that we'll be asking disciplines to prioritize which competencies really need to be an assessed milestone. But the e-portfolio is supposed to support activity across all competency domains. Is it possible to learn which are the initial disciplines in the pilot stage? I don't have a list of those in front of me. I can give you a couple of examples. Pediatric surgery here in Canada has already had a workshop on designing milestones using the current CanMEDS framework. And that's because they want to keep up with their southern cousins in the U.S. It's an integrated North American match, and they both sides of the border want to have similar milestones. Another example is that medical oncology has worked on milestones and EPAs for a couple of years now. Otolaryngology has a project underway to do a Delphi process to define some milestones for certain procedures. And those are just 3 examples off the top of my head. There are many more. For some disciplines like PEDS, some residents leave after 3 years to do a fellowship. Will the first fellowship year double counting stop? So under Competence by Design, that does not preclude double counting. It just means that there needs to be agreement of both disciplines, both program directors, and achievement of all milestones must still be occur in order to achieve certification in the base specialty. How that's accomplished is up to the 2 disciplines to work out. So double counting is still allowed under this new system. Maybe the last one for today, residents share a complex joint role as students as well as employees, and sometimes there's a tension, they're at odds with each other from time to time. While it's an expectation this won't impact funding, this could affect clinical service delivery. Will the health authorities be engaged to consider impacts to the workforce plans? So a couple of things to answer that. One is that you should know that we are rolling this out as a communication plan to all those stakeholders. We want hospitals and department chairs and health authorities to know this new system is coming. But again, we're trying to carefully design the system so that residents are learning while providing clinical service, just as they do now. This system would not preclude a so-called pure service rotation. That would be possible under this new system, where the focus is actually on productivity and flow, and behaving like a junior attending. That would be the milestones of that rotation. So service is not gone in this new system. In fact, service is essential for someone to achieve all these milestones. It's a re-emphasis of all the energy that's in our current existing residency training and so on. So I'm going to wrap up for today. You can still have your say. You can still email canmeds@royalcollege.ca. You can look for us on Twitter, on Facebook, and there'll be a whole series of announcements, publications, releases of documents, drafts, and a series of webinars like this that will be going on over the next year. And we really do hang on your every word. We keep track of every input that comes into the office. We analyze it for themes, and we feed back some of that information to our expert working group so they can incorporate your thinking. Thanks so much for joining us today, everybody. We hope that this CanMEDS webinar met your needs, that at least whetted your appetite to learn more about what's coming down the pipe. I hope you're as excited about this as those of us who are involved in designing it.